All right, everyone, I am now live from Vermont. Of course, this event will be in New York City. I'm just actually waiting at the moment. This is a little bit of dead air that I'm trying to fill up right now for them to connect so that it can go fully live here. I do actually have a slight head cold, so keep that in mind. My throat is a little bit on the scratchy side at the moment. So I am just going to wait while my cohort here connects, so we can actually get the broadcast straight from New York City, actually, for the Gathering of the Minds conference. And, of course, going quickly through this, we have Lionel, we have Tim Pool, we have Bill Ottman of Minds.com itself, of course, Polyakov, Goldfield, and Pinchbeck, actually. If you look in the description of the live feed that you're looking at, probably on YouTube, you can find links to their respective pages that they wanted put in there. And beyond that, I guess I'm just going to wait here a little bit, because I think the ultimate goal was to actually have the show begin legitimately and officially at 6:30. Of course, I wanted to go live at 6:15, make sure everything was working all right. We may, of course, encounter a glitch here, but I think we got everything worked out. So taking a moment here, I'm actually going to turn my camera off briefly and mute my microphone as we actually await them coming in. But consider this like at most a 15-minute-ish warning. So yeah, that's about all for the next 15 minutes.
Like they're corporate person as opposed to natural person. So they're not identifying with the actual corporate, birth certificate. Yeah.
And then they've gotten away with it. Like they've gotten like cases have been dismissed.
Can you identify as a corporation?
There we go. Yeah, I think a lot of people.
Is it a protected class?
Hey.
It's funny because it's like.
Yes, I am.
Hey, Six, I can hear you, but we don't see you for some reason. Hold on 1 second here.
Hold up.
Yeah, hold on. Somebody tripped over the wire, so we want to make sure that everything is. Sorry, Sticks. Please talk about whatever you want to talk about. 1 second.
All right. Yeah, I am testing. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
All right, where is the microphone? There it is.
Last thing, are all the chairs going to be full, or is there one empty?
There's going.
Daniel's coming.
Daniel's coming. All right, Sticks, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I'm actually going to mute my mic. If you wanted to do intros at some point here, I can just stay muted until then.
All right,
You'd like me to.
Make a full screen over here. I am not sure how to make a full screen on Google Hangouts.
Don't worry about it.
All right, I'm not going to worry about it. Fine. If it's fine for you guys, it's fine for me. I don't care.
The Google Hangout is looking fine on at least on the live feed end.
Sounds good. It's looking fine for me as well.
Okay, I'm muting.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Gathering of the Minds. I'm Lev Polyakov, the chair of the Art and Technology Committee, and I am very, very excited to have all of you fine people here today for this event where we've gotten people of different views, but at the same time, they all stand for anti-censorship. And that's the thing, right? Like, I have no idea what you guys think as far as what the world should be like. Probably you guys would get into really big arguments if some of you were left with each other for a very long time. But that's besides the point, because there is another force that we are all fighting against right now, which is the force that seeks to divide us and make us fight amongst ourselves, and the force that seeks to withhold information from us. So as long as we don't worry that much about certain disagreements and can civilly sit with each other and talk about it, then that's it. Then we can work against whatever this thing is. So with that, I want to bring the focus on my wonderful panel over here. We've got Tim Poole, we've got Bill Ahmed of Minds, we've got Eleanor Goldfeld, and we've got Lionel. And let us start with the person who helped me make this event a reality, Bill Ahmed.
Thanks, Len. Everyone. So my name is Bill Ahmed. I founded Minds, minds.com, minds.org. Check them out. We're a free speech social network, open source, encrypted. You get rewarded with digital currency for being active on the app. You can actually exchange that currency for more views on your content or peer-to-peer with other creators. And we're trying to create a space where creators can make money, earn a living, be independent, and not be censored. So we're taking the stance that the best way to fight hate speech is actually with free speech. So we don't censor anything as long as it's legal in the US. And there's something happening, generally speaking, on the internet with censorship on proprietary surveillance platforms. And people are pretty pissed, so that's why we're here. Tim.
Howdy, my name is Tim Poole. I'm a journalist and technologist. I was a founding member of Vice News several years ago. I worked for a company called Fusion for a couple of years. And in the past year, I've been entirely independent, producing my content on YouTube and Twitter and other platforms. And I don't think I've dealt with the worst censorship. Certainly there are many people I feel have been wrongly banned or taken offline, but I do have some really interesting moments where I was wrongly silenced. I don't think it's that bad, but I think we'll have an interesting discussion, so thanks for having me.
Let's go to Eleanor.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Goldfield. I'm a creative activist, a journalist, and a few other things. I have a show that airs on Free Speech TV. It's called Act Out. That's my primary form of my journalism. And of course, as part of the alternative media, I have been severely throttled on places like Google and Facebook. So that's why I'm happy that things like Minds exist. So I'm happy to be here.
Excuse me, my name is Lionel, one name like God. I am a practicing lawyer. This is my 30th year in professional talk radio and the like, so I've been around various aspects of limited speech and the like. I do media and legal analysis. I have my own YouTube platform as well, and I am so glad to be here tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome, Lionel. So, from the panelists who are here, what is
Well,
your...
let's get Sticks in there.
Oh,
first, too.
shit. All right, Sticks.
Also known as, oh shit, most people don't.
I'm up on the wall, so it's harder to see me. My name is Styx Hexenhammer 666, real name Tarl Warwick. I wanted my stage name to be as unpronounceable as my real name. YouTuber, author, editor. For some time now, I can remember YouTube 10 years ago, and I can remember the dark old days of the censorship that we got at the time from the moralists that existed then. My concern in the last couple of years has really morphed from maybe a more partisan angle or even a third party sort of independent angle towards simply wanting to combat censorship itself. I've seen lately it's interesting to see people branching out to other platforms because I've always considered myself a YouTuber. I then had to branch out to other sites, and now I have a multi-platform presence that I think it's important for people to actually have in this day and age of the tech world.
So can I ask a question real quick? This is being live streamed on YouTube, right?
This is being live streamed
Okay.
from a Styx's account.
You guys just swore and the video's been demonetized most likely.
Uh-oh.
We're using the enemy platform to combat it.
Yeah, you can't swear, they'll turn off your ads.
I take full
Oh,
responsibility.
by the way, the demonetization has nothing to do with swearing. It has a lot to do with who you are and what you say. Because you will notice demonetization before you even go public by virtue of the subject matter and who you are. You can be some of the most vile, I didn't even try to jump into this, but you can be the most vile person spewing F-bombs in sorty fashion. You're okay. But depending upon if you fall into certain categories, I've noticed, for example, one time, just as an example, the YouTube title was, Why I Love This Country, something like that, or Why Puppies Are Cute. I did it deliberately, never said a word. I look, and it immediately says, not advertiser friendly. Hadn't even posted it yet. Why puppies are cute? So
Well, I actually agree with you. I made a video in South Korea called something like Visiting the Raccoon Cafe. Literally just me and a friend for 7 minutes laughing and throwing food at raccoons in a South Korean cafe. Demonetized, yeah.
So what do you guys think is the reason that all of this demonetization is going on? And furthermore, what have your experiences been with this demonetization from the very beginning? Like, did you see it growing into something that it is right now with the YouTube purge over time? Or how did it all work out for you guys?
Well, it's interesting, if you look at the history of places like Twitter and YouTube, I mean, they started out with their roots in free speech. Twitter's slogan was free speech wing of the free speech party. So there is inner turmoil happening within these companies. It's not black and white, like they're evil, alternative platforms are good. There are people there who want to do good things, but it seems like the power structure in those companies are more extractive, pro-surveillance, pro-censorship. So it's something we're against.
I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it does, like Lionel said, it has everything to do with who you are and your history and what you're talking about. For example, I noticed a friend of mine put up a post that said something about Israel, and then it not only was it demonetized, but they actually started losing subscribers. Like YouTube will knock subscribers off, and he started getting messages like, "Hey, I had to resubscribe to your YouTube channel like 4 different times." He then changed the name of the video. So instead of saying like Israel something something, it was all one word. So it was kind of impossible to take out. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is fine. It didn't pop up on their scanners, I guess, as being just Israel because he made it like one long ridiculous word. And so it's very clear that what is being censored is what you're talking about. And particularly if you are part of a larger network, like RT America or like the Young Turks or other alternative media sites, Mid-Press News and things like that, like have been really, really lambasted with that sort of censorship on YouTube in particular, but also on other sites as well.
I want to just point out, I have been looking at demonetization for a long time. I've got a friend who's got a big YouTube channel who was demonetized before anyone even talked about demonetization. So right now, when they demonetize, you get a little yellow $, meaning there's limited ads. And my buddy, he runs a channel called We Are Change. He was having his ads just turned off. Someone at Google was going in and turning the ads off on his channel. I've been looking at this for a long time. I really can't understand how it works because they'll claim it's sensitive issues. Okay, if that was the case, then why are mainstream news outlets allowed to talk about, say, the Florida incident or other Las Vegas and run ads on it just fine? Oh, well, they're on a preferred network, things like that. Yet then there are people, I actually see channels on YouTube where you actually have a guy in like Clan Robes and it's running ads, and I'm just like, clearly it's not politics. I don't know what it is, but perhaps it's us, or I don't think it has to do with advertisers being scared. I really can't figure it out.
Sticks, what do you think it has to do with?
I think that it has to do specifically with issues of a partisan type that certain people, not necessarily even at YouTube, but I think people working with them don't like. For instance, we've seen that they're working now with certain NGOs. They've put out ads literally showcasing the sort of things that they're looking into. Some of these have to do with it literally, explicitly. The ADL's recent readout. Gun rights appear to be on that list. At the very least, occasionally, you're going to have people censored who are speaking about pro-Second Amendment issues, even if it has nothing to do with what they would even class as they are maybe a politicized NGO, really to do with what they would also classify as hate. I think there are probably people within the big tech firms who themselves have bias. I think that almost, though, takes a back seat at this point in a monetization sense to people who are members of third-party groups. We saw ultimately it was the legacy media, my word for the corporate media and some of the ad firms really that cracked down on YouTube, really as a preface to their late spree of demonetization, censorship, the strikes that we've had with the YouTube purge. And we've seen the fruits of that. They now claim that some of the people who were accidentally banned under the YouTube purge, it was just an accident. Literally, these news staff, they didn't quite know what they were doing, and that was the problem. I highly doubt that, to tell the truth.
It actually kept happening. After YouTube said that it was a mistake and their moderators were learning, it happened for several more days where more mistakes kept happening, even though they acknowledged it.
May I ask, does everybody know what we're talking about with monetization? Is it this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because the story started off taking the side of YouTube and Alphabet just for a second, for some reason or another, I don't know why. But apparently Kraft Macaroni and Cheese took great umbrage at having their ads start off or begin an ISIS beheading video. Now, I don't know why somebody didn't say with all of the algorithms and all of and I say algorithm like I know what the hell I'm talking about, but you would think somebody would be able to say, hey, this is a video, it has a beheading in here and it's not a movie. So instead of saying, why don't we do our best to perhaps maybe look at these videos a little bit better, or ask advertisers, do you mind an ISIS ad? Who knows? They immediately just said, everybody must fall under this incredible dragnet of overreaction. So it kind of made sense. The other problem is there is no First Amendment against private entities. There is no First Amendment protection against a private company telling you you can't do something. That's their way out. It's not the government, it's just Google, which is the government.
Yeah, it seems like they're missing the point with what most advertisers probably want. So if a computer company wants to sell a computer, realistically, they want to sell a computer to people no matter their political belief, because people need computers. So, but YouTube is assuming that's not true, and they're assuming that the advertisers only want to sell computers to certain type of people. So we're trying to create more of a decentralized ad network where there's just no censorship in regards to or arbitrary subjective decisions made with regards to advertising. People should be able to advertise what they want and with who they want when they want to.
There's something interesting that I noticed in a study that came out a little while ago from Oxford, where they claimed that Trump supporters share the most fake news. I just want to preface this with the study their seed list of news sources was predominantly conservative, so don't be surprised if you find Trump supporters share the most conservative news. But what they also found was that when they created a map of the various political factions from right to left, Democrat, Republican, Trump, and the resistance, brand marketing, content produced by brands to sell products predominantly fell in the resistance category. That's, anti-Trump, Trump impeach, very activisty groups that are very, anti-Russia, that kind of stuff.
I have a question. Are you worried about the ads that are taken off your sites or your content being destroyed? I mean, it sounds like you're worried about the money you're not making or something. I'm not understanding quite. Is this about the content that's not being seen because you're worried about your messages not getting out, or is it because your ads are being wiped out?
There's multiple layers of censorship happening. So there's censorship of content, just a video being uploaded and then it being taken down for XYZ reason. But then there's censorship sort of not allowing certain content to make money. So taking the livelihood away from certain people based upon their content, which is a form of censorship. It's more of a financial censorship.
So you can't produce your content without that ad in there. For free, let's say.
I think one of the big problems, I will say, I think we fell into the demonetization discussion because I just pointed it out and that's where we ended up. I personally don't think demonetization is as big a deal as everyone makes it out to be. It is an issue because there are a lot of people who don't essentially know how to monetize outside of the fact that YouTube runs ads on your account. And one of the ways to silence somebody is to strip them of their resources, and then eventually they'll disappear. And then they can say, oh, we never censored them, just advertisers didn't want to be on their content. Well, that's actually, I can say legitimately, for the most part, that's not true. I've had videos that have been demonetized where people hit me up on email saying, we'd love to sponsor this video. So what made YouTube decide that advertisers wouldn't want to be on my video? When an advertiser goes in the network and says, I want to spend $1,000 on my commercial, they'll check a little box saying no controversial videos. So there's a series of selections they can choose from, in which case YouTube will arbitrarily decide, I believe arbitrarily, that my videos or someone else's videos should be in those categories, even if they don't fit. And then you end up, lacking resources.
So what I'm really curious about is when it comes to these NGOs that have been pressuring companies like Google to censor certain things, how much of this is about the money as far as having an organization that has to justify its own existence, and how much is it about a certain idea of what's right and what's wrong and trying to suppress something people believe should be suppressed? Oh, and by the way, before I ask that, I would like to present our final panelists for this evening, the wonderful, and I know you don't like that word, Lionel, but it really applies to this gentleman here, Daniel Pinchbeck. Let's give him a round of applause. Sticks, I would be especially interested in you talking with Daniel as well, because both of you guys are in the mystic realms. So, but anyway, the question that I was just asking the panel was about the intention, let's not even just say NGOs, but of people in general, people who believe that it's right to censor and suppress and divide for the greater good. Like Lionel, where do you see this starting from and where do you see that going?
Censorship, you asked a great question. Let me see if I can translate. Are you bitching and moaning about making money? Or is it about having your content and your thoughts and ideas completely quashed and removed? The answer is yes, all of the above. You can also be shelved. You can be shadow banned. You can be removed. You can have views drop. You can say, as has been the case, as Mr. O'Keefe and others have shown us, that there are ways to have people not know that they're in a form of video or platform Siberia. And it is absolutely, without a doubt, coming at every level, from YouTube, you name it, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Facebook, I know nobody cares about Facebook, but it is now being called community standards, or you've been bullied, or you've been banned. And what I believe is it's a slow and gradual habituation to see how much will you take. I'm in timeout. I'm off today. They shut me down for 24 hours. And people are just going, okay, like we're just sheep that just take this, because people say, well, after all, you don't have a right to this. You don't have a right, and that's where this is. You don't have a right to Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is. Start your own. Be a mind. This isn't the government. And the worst part about it is not so much this, but the number of people that I know who are completely just oblivious to it and who don't care. They're nushing, they're bored, they're well, you know, whatever it is, it's that social thing. So that's the problem too, inaction as well as action.
Sticks, what do you think?
I think that ultimately the NGOs don't really care about money. It's not so much about any sort of income for them. It's really about suppressing opinions that they don't like. I think they're mostly, though, working on behalf of other third parties. What I've said, what I think is happening, if we look, for instance, at the attacks on even, you know, you would think of corporate groups, essentially, InfoWars. It is a business, fundamentally. It may be one that's entertaining. It's not the same as CNN, but it is a for-profit, multi-million-dollar business. We have a strange situation now where nobody bats an eye at the fact that CNN would come out, do a write-up, an expose, so-called, on Alex Jones or on InfoWars and say, oh, we're encouraging YouTube to kick them off the platform. We got this video struck down, haha. We submitted some others that were similar. You know, you understand what the actual goal is. And for them, it's about money. For them, it's, hey, there's a competitor on YouTube who has more support, more grassroots support than we do, we CNN, in this fight. We want to kick them off. The NGOs are just sort of a tool, I think, at that point. Now, one that has managed to get in with YouTube, convince them that they're noble, or convince them, possibly, behind closed doors, hey, if you don't work with us, we're going to get your platform screwed. Because we have power, we can label you a haven for bigots. We can keep talking about this non-existent army of skinheads that supposedly is using YouTube to really coerce people. I saw earlier, the main man for Right Wing Watch, Jared Holt, was sharing out an article. And this was very funny to me. This is something that needs to be said. I was going to speak about it in a video, but here's as good a place as any. He's sharing out an article that says, oh, the alt-right, you know, the boogeyman, really, of modern culture is collapsing. And I thought to myself, if the extremists, so-called, according to him, are collapsing, then why exactly do we need more censorship on these websites? Because I'm getting a totally different story. The ADL is telling me that extremism is on the rise, already prevalent, and that it's basically being sheltered by these online sites. I haven't seen that as a YouTuber, as a content creator. I simply don't see, I suppose, what they're seeing. But I think ultimately it's in partnership with groups within the old guard, the corporate media, because they're being outcompeted by people like everybody on this panel tonight.
I have to disagree with some of that. So I used to be a director at various nonprofits dealing with fundraising. And I can tell you the moment that I decided I probably wouldn't do this anymore. I can't name the company because I'll probably get sued to oblivion. But it was around the time the Deepwater Horizon disaster happened. And they wanted us to fundraise, and they wrote us a pitch that was a total lie. They were lying about the scale of the disaster. They were lying about the amount of crude being poured into the ocean. And I said, why? You don't need to lie. Why would you expect me to lie to our potential donors? And that did not sit very well with them. When I look at these companies that are in the Trusted Flagger program, you know, I think most notably we have the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League. They need to justify their existence. When their job is done, they stop. They go away. But that's not what's happening. They keep saying it's getting worse, and you need to donate. Because if they tell you that extremism is going down, they tell you that you don't need us to police YouTube, then why would anyone give them money? They'd be out of a job.
As far as Daniel, you go, I know that, for example, with Graham Hancock, there were various instances of people in the mainstream of archaeology completely dismissing his views. And the things that you were able to witness in your lifetime, I think, speak to a deeper understanding of what exactly is going on this planet. Would you also say that there is a censorship going on, whether it's various NGOs or just people who like being in the position that they are, to keep things a certain way, a certain style?
So I kind of feel that I've jumped into a discourse and I'm still trying to figure out how I resonate with the whole discourse.
As far as YouTube censorship goes, I wouldn't really say you've ever been censored.
It just seemed like a huge number of different issues were suddenly brought up. I'm not quite sure which one to address, but there's a paradigm. There's like a mainstream paradigm that's somebody challenges it. They're going to get censored in certain respects. I mean, like Graham Hancock and Rupert Sheldrake did TEDx talks that were taken down from the TED site. because they had problems with, they felt that they weren't, scientific in terms of their definitions. I don't think it's always, conspiratorial. I feel that's kind of like, outsider perspective maybe, that things are happening due to very nefarious, means and so on. I mean, I think for instance, Facebook, has evolved, started by kids 20, 15 years ago. It's evolved in a certain way. They're trying to figure things out. I'm not sure it's as nefarious as, or much of a plot, in a sense. And then, yeah, but I do think we have a big problem with hate speech, with sort of neo-Nazi speech. I mean, and I'm not sure where I stand. I may have a different perspective. I think sometimes there is certain types of speech which isn't really helpful to the public. Like Richard Spencer saying that maybe we need another genocide against African Americans. I don't really know if I consider that to be speech that should be protected to be in the public domain, or maybe there are reasons why Germany, like after the Nazi era, had to not allow certain types of discourse.
Well, if we have two roads that we could go on, either banning it or not banning it, Bill, I'd be interested in what you think, and also Styx, you've had a big experience with this as well, as far as being able to talk with some of these kinds of people. Where do you think the road would lead if we do outright ban and censor things that are as horrible as we can ever imagine?
Well, when Lev and I were getting dinner, he used a really good word for it, which was fermentation of bad ideas happens when you ban them, generally speaking. That, okay, you ban them from the mainstream, sort of out of sight, out of mind, but where they go, they're not going away. They're actually going to find their own little rat hole on the internet and just fester and do their thing. So, useful speech is different from free speech, I think, and social consensus on what is useful, that's different from the law.
I think one important thing about free speech is when I see these deplatformings, recently Sargon of Akkad, who was a YouTuber, had a bunch of anti-fascist protesters come in and shut the event down. When you shut the events down and you don't allow these people to speak, they will find the little red corner of the internet, they will find the little hole somewhere in the wall, and there will be no one to challenge them. And that means when they do convince someone to come in and sit down and hear what they have to say, they're only going to hear good things. And that person's going to be like, wow, all of this makes sense and I believe it. When you create an open forum with real debate, you can have someone say, here's why they're wrong and I can prove it, and that creates useful speech.
Eleanor, what do you think?
There's so many thoughts going on in my head right now. Where to start? I think that prohibition has never helped the U.S. I mean, you can look at anything, something as seemingly trivial compared to the rise of fascism as the prohibition of alcohol, and that led to the mafia, and it led to the installation of gangs in a lot of major cities. But I think instead of looking at it like just sort of like this black and white situation, I think it also helps to ask the question, and I don't pretend to have the answer to this, but also to ask the question, like, what do we want our social media platforms to be? Do we want them to be an exact representation of like a street corner where anybody can go and say anything that they want? Because I think it's important to note that social media platforms are not, they don't have the same restrictions or freedoms that a street corner does. So for example, in the book, Corporations Are Not People, the author talks about like how Philip Morris argued that, a smoking ad is just like it's just like free speech. It's just like a person standing on the street corner telling people that he really enjoys smoking. But that's not true, because that's not subject to somebody walking up to that person saying, hey, this is really messed up that you feel this way, let's talk about it. A social media platform, as I'm sure a lot of you could attest to, it doesn't have that real life feeling. I mean, I get trolled so often on social media, but I get trolled so infrequently in real life because you have this freedom to be horrible online that a lot of people don't take that freedom offline. That's not to say that I think that everybody who trolls me should be banned from the internet. That would be absurd. But I think that we should take things like threats, and we should take things like calls to genocide entire peoples. I think we should take that very seriously and ask ourselves, what do we want our social media platforms to be? And particularly like in this moment of the rise of anti-intellectualism, the the rise of these far-right extremist groups, do we want our social media platforms to be open to them? And I'm not saying I have the answer. I think it's a very difficult question to grapple with, but I think it's worth contemplating, like, how do we want our social media platforms to look in regards to how free speech looks in the real world, and ask that question, like, just because these people have free speech, you know, in the real world, does that mean that we have to be the platform for them? Because free speech, for example, doesn't apply if somebody walks into my apartment and starts shrieking at me. That's not free speech. But outside on the sidewalk, that's free speech. And I think it's that sort of question that needs to be grappled with in terms of the online experience.
We can divide this up into different issues. First of all, we can talk about terms of protocol. Obviously, it's social media, which is it's almost an oxymoron, because when you think about what you can and can't say. But obviously, you shouldn't be able to abuse people. That's not what we're talking about. There's got to be some kind of something. Here, for example, you got to wear a jacket. No shirt, no shoes, no service. We're used to that. The issue is that when Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, as seemingly innocent and cute as they are, but people who, for example, just spend their days taking pictures of their sleeping dogs or whatever it is, this happens to be the source of news for 90% of America. Now, all of a sudden, this little cute little social media turns into a utility, in my view. It's bigger than anything. This is where people get their news. Now, it's one thing to say, you can't curse, you can't pose child pornography. Yeah, we know that. But if all of a sudden you're posting something, or you're finding that you're not getting the news that you thought you should be because Facebook, whatever, are throttling or shutting it down, that's a different issue. Very quickly, 25, 30 years ago, there was an idea called hate crimes. And hate crimes, we love the idea, which to me is oxymoron. I don't know about love crimes or what that means, but anyway, but years ago, there was a thing called hate crimes. It was the idea of taking something that is already cognizable in law, let's say battery, hitting somebody is against the law. But if I take why you hit somebody, why? Because you don't like Alsatians, or you don't like black people, right? And I take that and I pair a constitutionally protected idea of hate, because you can hate all you want, just don't act on it. All of a sudden, I'm now elevating, I'm penalizing somebody for what they thought. And I'm also making it difficult for the prosecutor, because now I've got to prove, in addition to intent, why you did something. It was a mess, horrible. Every prosecutor hated that, but society loved it. And with that came the idea of confusing that which we as a society hate, loathe, and eschew, and want to get rid of in terms of hate and genocide and all that, with governmental or quasi-governmental banning of the ability, and what falls under the category of hate. What does that mean? Once you okay a limitation, I'm going to get around it. And I'm going to limit your speech by using your rule, which you started with the greatest of intentions.
I missed the beginning. Who are you?
I'm your worst nightmare. And if you got here on time, you would know that. My name is Lionel.
I never assumed they would start so early, because most people didn't get out of work until like 6:30 or whatever. The Bible, and what's your background?
Pardon me?
What
Legal and media analyst. I'm a lawyer.
Okay, cool. Me? I'm a writer. I've written a few books. I wrote a book called Breaking Up in the Head on psychedelic shamanism, and most recently a book called How Soon Is Now, which he's actually carrying over here, which is looking at the ecological crisis we're facing as a kind of rite of passage for humanity, and trying to envision like a solution path beyond the cul-de-sac. Yeah, I guess like one thing that I really feel strongly is that there's no such thing as a neutral platform, just as there's no such thing as objective journalism. So I think just by creating an interface and design in a way that people, interact with content, you're already making so many choices about how people, what information they're getting. I mean, even the fact that we get our information in rectangles rather than circles or bubbles is a choice that formats our thinking in a certain way. So I think that people who run these types of platforms like Minds need to be thinking in the fact that they're already creating a medium that has a perspective. There isn't really such a thing as neutrality or objectivity, as quantum physics tells us, and so on. I so I can put your thumbs down and we'll simply.
I'm Tim Poole, I'm a journalist.
Okay, cool. What do you write for?
I am a video journalist, so I work for Vice for Fusion, now I'm independent. I don't want to get too much into it, but there is objective journalism, and people often confuse.
Sorry, how could there be objective journalism objective anything?
Because you're confusing omniscience with objectivity. right? So I'll give you an example. If I was to report on what, two people in the back of the room were doing, I don't know any of them, and I would say guy A threw a piece of paper at guy B. I'm objectively telling you what I saw. That happened. A guy threw something, right?
Well, I mean, that's what you're choosing to isolate of everything else that's happening.
Well, so certainly, if there's two guys on the street, and I'm standing across the street, and someone punches the other guy, I can tell you objectively, that guy punched that guy.
Yeah, but that's what you're choosing objectively.
If someone asks me what happened,
So
if someone said what happened, I'd say that guy punched
And
that
you
guy.
might also say that there was like this newspaper blowing in the gutter,
And
so you're
so-
making a choice of the
right,
infinite
so
range of things to say
Objectivity,
that something is important. So that's what makes it
objectivity
subject
and
to
reporting.
decision.
See, we're talking, you're arguing omniscience, right? Obviously, I'm not gonna stand in the street corner and just know everything. But if I'm in a place and I'm looking at a group of people and I see someone do something and someone asks me what I saw, I can objectively say, I don't know who those people are. Now, if one of those people happen to be like a friend of mine, that's not objective, so there's a difference there. But I don't wanna get too much in this because we're not on a journalism panel, but I do wanna mention one interesting thing you brought up that I think Bill absolutely needs to pay attention to, is that if it is true that the right is targeted more by censorship on these platforms, which I'm not saying it is, then at least the perception is among the right. So what happens is they flock to alternative platforms. You then, as you were just saying, the platforms aren't neutral, not in the sense that they can't be, but you're going to get more of one kind of person coming to your platform, and then how do you prevent that platform from just being a platform for their politics?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, censorship is happening to both the right and left. It seems a little bit more tipped towards the right, but I mean, LGBTQ, Wired did a really interesting piece about LGBTQ censorship on Facebook for, whatever it is, nipples, certain language. So it's affecting the whole spectrum, but I mean, yeah, I think as long as we're guiding the conversation to where that is not pure neutrality. We're having this conversation. We're not just letting it happen without talking about it.
That's a huge conundrum, because I'm sure YouTube would say we're guiding the conversation. We want to make sure the racists aren't, flourishing. It's a challenge.
I guess the question is like, how do you guide the conversation without creating the sort of filter bubbles that Facebook has created where like, if I Google something and you Google the same exact thing, we'll get two different results. We'll get two different pages of results. And it's the same thing if I log on to Facebook and Facebook knows that I predominantly look at, environmental justice pages. It'll show me those predominantly. But even if my mom follows the same pages, but she's more interested in dancing, then she'll see the dancing. So it's like, how do you guide the conversation without restricting it and creating these sort of filter bubbles that are basically just echo chambers?
Well, that's why the chronological unrestricted newsfeed is essential by default. I mean, that is actually an example of technical neutrality that is really important so as not to create those bubbles and let people continue to reach their audiences. On Facebook and Google, you're reaching 3% organically now, so.
But do you think people will automatically start filtering certain things out of their feed that they don't want to see and go back into those bubbles?
Boost breaks the bubble. You can opt out of Boost if you want. I mean, ultimately, look, you're gonna create your experience and we think users.
Can you say a little bit about Boost just so everybody knows?
Users deserve to control what they're seeing. I mean, just having algorithms dictate your daily flow of information is ridiculous. Like, you should subscribe if you want to subscribe to, unsubscribe from them if you don't want to see them. Boost is a system where you can boost your posts based on the amount of currency that you have, and you can get more views on it, and boosts show up every once in a while on your feed, and that's sort of how the network is driven. But you don't know what those boosts are going to be, so that's a good bubble popper. And then the other tools are just listening to conversations, trying to subscribe to people you disagree with. I don't know. There comes a point where education matters. You have to educate yourself.
Bill, here's a question for you. What would be a way that you could create metrics around whether Minds was having a positive or negative impact on people's capacity for reasoning?
Maybe we could run a secret experiment like Facebook did, where they measured people's moods and they injected either happy or sad content and then looked at their posts and reactions. And they figured out that they could dictate people's happiness levels. And it was, so now experiments like that,
You're jumping to a negative.
I know, potentially that could be positive, but it would have to be totally by the consent of the user. obviously, and all of the data would have to be totally public. So you could have it in a transparent way, I guess.
I'm also wondering if there's a way, because I feel like one of the things that gets lost on social media is the ability to change your mind, or even like being asked to change your mind that's not also coupled with a death threat. So I'm wondering if there's a way for a place of minds to say like, hey, this is, like on Facebook we have like the ridiculous like recommended for you. But if there was an actual way to make a recommended for you that was outside of the purview of your typical pages that you follow, and it was like, so like I might get something that was more like not as left as I am on the political spectrum, and I could read it and be like, oh, well, that has some interesting points. And that way I'm going to it, I'm not getting it thrown in my face by someone who's angry. And yet at the same time, that's a way to get outside of the filter bubble.
That's a good suggestion.
Sticks, as far as getting people out of their bubbles, that's one thing I would like to ask you, but also the conversation about talking with people who most people would not approve of that much, and how that actually stops the fermentation that Bill was referring to before when we were having dinner.
Well, those two things really go hand in hand, because the best way, if you're talking about social media, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, whatever, I think, this is just my feeling, the best way to challenge someone's echo chamber to prevent them from becoming, too fanatic, maybe they get violent, or they remain ignorant of reality, perhaps, is to challenge their views by not creating an echo chamber in the public space in the first place. I think the biggest problem that we're seeing emerge on YouTube isn't even so much, the rules as the discerning behavior of the moderation staff and the algorithms. I think what's happened is that they're confusing vagary with the ability to just use a little bit of discretion in how they apply the rules. So we've got limited state. Limited state is applied to a video that does not actually break the rules, but it comes close to breaking the rules. The final decision on whether your video should go in that category is made by a perfectly fallible, potentially biased human being. I think that the biggest problem is if you're worried about extremists, you're worried about fanatics, zealots, whatever, those people, you're worried fundamentally about them having an extreme bias. How do you then fix for the fact that some of the people policing that behavior may themselves have similar degrees of bias? I think that's becoming a big problem. I think Facebook is becoming irrelevant at this point, so I'm not sure why even bother talking about it. It's dying as a platform. None of the new kids, so to speak, use it. People from my generation, of course, we're gravitating away. We're using Minds or Gab or something like that. Nobody cares about Zuckerberg's synth experiments anymore in the Institute. But definitely you've gotten to the point where you've got people being chased into echo chambers, and you can go to them. But I think people should be able to go to an extremist echo chamber as long as they're not like plotting terrorism or something. But in the public forum, as long as you have a company, I understand what's being said here in the sense of a company or a site cannot be fully unbiased. I would acknowledge that that's the case. Therefore, their bias should be towards, hey, we're going to take a hands-off approach and let the user base actually sort of decide how things go. As far as news goes, challenging people's echo chamber is great, but at the same time, if they don't want to be challenged, ultimately, there's not a whole lot you can do other than put material out there that's interesting, hopefully, and smart, that's been independently produced that can actually get that accomplished. Because companies are totally inept when it comes to marketing, I think, things like that.
I'd like to, when I get the next opportunity, but I'd like to maybe provide or offer like a philosophical context for thinking about the discussion from maybe a different angle. I've been studying this book recently, but do people know Ken Wilber?
Yes.
Integral theory, and he has a new book out called Trump in a Post-Truth World. For me, it was really clarifying and really helpful. So Wilber's whole idea is a spiral dynamics model, which argues that there is an evolution of consciousness that happens through people kind of reaching more encompassing perspectives. So in the way we view even in an individual lifespan from childhood to adulthood. So people start out with maybe self-interest, then they have interest in their family or their local community or their ethnic identity or their national identity. And then these are different memes that he assigns different colors to. He believes that since the 1960s, the leading edge of consciousness on the planet has been what he calls the green meme. And about 20% of the population in the US, he argues, is in this green leading edge. And it's postmodern, could characterize as pluralistic, world-centric, no longer out of this idea of ethnic identities, believing that everybody has a right to live and prosper and so on. But as that form of consciousness has become predominant, its negative polarities have also become more evident. And what those are is if you believe that everybody is equal, then the negative aspect is there's no privileged position. There's also no truth, so it collapses into relativism. Ken Wilber calls it aperspectival madness. And so deconstruction is an example of this. This idea there's no truth, there's no privileged position, and so on. And so what that's caused is a gap that allowed for this Trump nightmare to happen. Because when there's no truth, and you could say, oh, it's all fake news, it's only bias, and so on. And so now we're in a world where, we can't establish what's better than something else as a worldview. And Wilber says that actually we have to recognize, this pluralistic postmodern worldview is against hierarchies. But instead of hierarchies, he proposes we think of what he talks about as growth holarchies. That actually there is a natural evolution from ethnocentric identity to kind of planetocentric or even cosmocentric identity, and therefore that is an advance. Like it is better to not be trapped in an ethnic identity or to identify as a fascist who doesn't like black people or Jews or whatever. And so in that sense, I think media should have a function, conscious media should have a function of trying to help lead humanity away from these, sort of atavistic identities that are actually causing so much strife on the planet by helping them understand an ecological and holistic perspective. And that's what I would personally prefer to see something like mine says. It's not necessarily about negating these other worldviews, but figuring out a way to, to diminish their hold on people's psychologies. Because they have a kind of negativity, has a kind of hypnotic thrall on people and catches them in a kind of fascination loop, which then leads to things like school shootings and racist uprisings and so on.
It's a very fascinating observation, and I'd be interested in what everybody thinks, but I actually like to start with Styx. What do you think about what Daniel just said right now?
I think that if you have that deconstructivist view and you don't believe maybe in an objective right or wrong and you're going from merely the pragmatic, look around at the world today and the results of multiculturalism and censorship, they're not positive. The problem is there will always be a misapplication of any censorship, no matter how benevolent a certain person or group may be in trying to establish it.
I really don't feel like you really heard what I said. I don't really feel you're answering what I had to say. You're answering something else, which is okay, but it doesn't really feel like it answers what I was trying to express there. I don't know if you care.
What's the central point then, in a nutshell?
Constructive postmodern relativistic worldview is actually something to acknowledge and also to transcend, but not to then say there's no hierarchy. You can say there's no hierarchy, but there is an evolutionary trajectory, which is towards more inclusion and recognizing a kind of ultimately a holistic understanding that we are all one species connected to the planet. We have an interconnected as a responsibility for the whole. Like that's the trajectory we need to go in, right?
Yes.
I would disagree with that myself. I think it's important to keep in mind differences between individuals and groups for the purposes of governing one's life. Ultimately, though, but let's going a little bit further. Let's assume that you say that it's utopian, it's good, it's positive. You can't force other people to take part in it. How does that have anything to do with maybe tech firms or journalists attempting to coerce people? It just gives, trust me, it gives more ammunition to people like myself who are looking for an excuse to attack the corporate media, because the corporate media in every other aspect, you're essentially saying groups like maybe a CNN or whatever, I'm not sure, should, despite the fact that they tried to promulgate war, they themselves exploit hate, they try to use wedge issues, people's differences, to cause them to be at each other's throats so they can sensationalize and make money. Despite that fact, you would want them to be like the moral guardians of the universe. I think that's a terrible idea.
Of course, how did you get that perspective? That's totally not anything that I have to say.
I think what Daniel was trying to say, okay, I think I could be the mediator here,
I'm
perhaps.
really not, I mean, I'm not a fan of corporate media, but I do think that we, in this collapse into the negative pole of the green meme that Ken Wilber talks about, which sticks, I have to say, is exactly from my perspective where you're anchored right now. When there's such a rejection of evidence-based journalism, and I've written for the New York Times, and I don't like the New York Times. They're infiltrated by the CIA. There's no doubt you can go back to their history, how they promoted the Iraq War and yada yada. But when you write for them, there is a bedrock of journalism and fact checking, which is impressive, which you don't find in a lot of the alternative. Yeah, every quote is checked, every fact is checked. It's just checked. It just is.
It's not true.
No.
I've worked for
That's totally wrong, yeah.
I worked for
I'm
Disney
not
companies for
talking
2
about
years.
Disney, I'm talking about the New York Times.
Right. So,
And I'm not saying that they're a paragon. I don't like corporate media. I'm not a paragon of corporate media. But I'm saying there are standards that actually have meaning and value that should be then brought into this alternative realm, rather than this kind of like what's developing is this sense of like a total kind of vapid relativism where there's no point of view that's of more value than any other point of view, which isn't going to help us as a species. We should collapse into the miasma that we're already collapsing into.
Who decides which point of view is the right one?
Well, that's why I gave you Wilbur as a perspective, and I recommend a few of his books. I mean, he's not even my favorite thinker, but I think in this circumstance, he's very useful because there is an evolutionary trajectory, and there are point of views that are more encompassing, more humane, and actually better. To care about the Earth and the future of humanity is better than collapsing into an ethnospheric, racist, or some similar type of identity, which is separatist and won't allow us to grow past this point.
Well, Daniel, if, for example, in the Kabbalah, we have the idea of the spirit world, which is always giving off something, while we're always receiving something. If in the end we're all supposed to become as one and be able to telepathically communicate with each other, which I think is going to happen in the future, in the world that we're stuck in right now, we're still going to be full of selfish people who are going to be misusing emotions and emotionally volatile people for their own ends. And that's going to be a big problem when it comes to how do we know what the right decision is. So how careful should we be when it comes to, okay, I'm going to do this because it feels really, really good, because it feels really nice and righteous and noble, and how could that be misused against us?
Can I propose a litmus test? And that for a couple months ago, there were millions of views going to videos of children that were force feeding other children feces, children in bathtubs with feces and blood in it.
That
Really
sounds
weird,
horrible.
creepy stuff. And the Spider-Man costume was put on guys that were beating.
Oh yeah, you're talking about Elsagate.
Elsagate,
Yes.
yeah. And if you'll notice, a lot of the people who were recently banned were people who were very critical of those videos and the fact that they were being suggested somehow by the algorithm for children. And those people, like Titus Frost got banned, he got thrown off. He was very critical of what he was calling the kind of pedophilic videos. And I think that maybe also destroyed Evolution also, he got kicked off. And
So I actually I haven't followed this stuff, so I have no idea what you're talking about, but I do think you need to be careful about what you allow your own mind to dwell in, like dwelling in something that's that grotesque.
there were millions of views,
I mean,
it was
okay.
really big.
This is actually really interesting, and I think it's great you brought it up, because Elsagate is what happens when there is no oversight. What happened was, for those that don't know, the YouTube algorithm, when somebody watches a video for a long period of time, YouTube says the words in the title, the words in the description and tags must be good things. And so parents will turn YouTube on and hand it to their baby. The baby doesn't touch anything, sometimes might mash the keyboard. And so YouTube auto-plays based on the video, and it goes down this weird, it's kind of like what's that deep image search thing Google did when pictures are getting really weird. Someone makes a video of Elsa singing from Frozen, and then someone else makes a video dressed up as Elsa. Eventually, you really did end up with, it's hard to say, but depictions of children eating feces, simply because the algorithm worked. And people, there were bots producing content, there were human beings who said, hey, this is what works and makes us money and gets 1 million views, I'm gonna make it. And some of these high profile users were banned. That's what happens when there is no guiding force. Then we have the other problem. When someone determines, a small group of people or individual, what should be, then they start censoring content, saying your ideas aren't good and shouldn't be on the platform, and you start losing legitimate conversation. So those are the two extremes.
Don't you want a transcript of tonight's show? This is fantastic. May I ask a very simple question? This happened recently. Let's say you're on Twitter, just a regular person, and you say, you know what? I think these people in Florida, these students, I think they're crisis actors. I don't think, not that there wasn't a shooting, but I think they're paid, or I don't like them, or whatever. And you enter this, upload it, and all of a sudden they shut your account down because you're bullied. Facebook does the same thing. You can't say that. People say, yes, and there's a sense of how dare you, and then YouTube does it. Now, here's the question. Is that okay? Is it just, it's Twitter, it's not like it's a free speech violation, it's no big deal, they've got their rules, start up your own Twitter. Anybody see a problem with that? Because that happens all the time, very, very simply, or you will write something for whatever reason. You didn't phrase it correctly, we're not talking about infantile coprophagia, nothing even that gross, pretty simple. I don't think this is real, or I think it might have been a period of history, a particular story that didn't occur. I'm a revisionist. I don't believe it. It's my opinion. Nothing profane. I've got 4 followers. No big deal. They shut my account. Do I have any repercussions? Do I have any right? Or is that just the way it is? Because that's the issue. Somebody doesn't like your opinion. It's not the government. You're not being arrested. You're just shut down from your Twitter. What right do you have to just say things in the public domain?
I'd like to point out why that's a bigger problem than just having an opinion. Not too long ago, after the Florida incident happened, the Associated Press reported that a white nationalist took credit, saying that the shooter trained his camps. A little bit of research and you'd find out that it was likely a hoax perpetrated by users on the Discord platform who were trying to just trick the media. The Associated Press reported as fact. They cited the Anti-Defamation League, who cited 4chan as fact, which was surprising to me. Several different news outlets then sourced the AP saying it was all true. I made a video that day where I said, this is likely a hoax. And I showed some clips of why it was likely a hoax. I can't say definitively, but we know these people were attempting to do this for some time. And citing 4chan as fact is not a good idea. And who is this guy claiming he was actually had this kid at his camp anyway? This is not confirmed. YouTube took my video down and issued a community guideline strike saying that I was harassing and bullying, presumably the white nationalists, which was shocking to me. The next day, the Associated Press issued a correction. Yes, they shouldn't have sourced the Anti-Defamation League, who found some random guy on the internet. And a day later, YouTube brought my video back, no word, no apology, no correction. So what happens when someone at YouTube or another platform decides, you know what, you're probably wrong because a large corporate news entity says, disagrees with you? Well, then there's going to come a time when a legitimate story comes out. I think a lot of these conspiracy theories are crazy. I mean, they're real conspiracy theories. We know that.
But what right do you have to YouTube? Let's assume everything you're saying is exactly correct. You just expressed something and somebody overreacted or not. What right do we have to express speech on social platforms? It's a very simple question. Is there a right, or is that just the way it goes? Start your own version.
Whether or not it's a right or not, I didn't violate any of their guidelines. That was a false strike.
And if you are unfairly taken down, what? That's the issue.
There's the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Any of you are aware?
Sure, yes.
All right, John Perry Barlow, these are guys that really started in 1990 with what the beginning of this discussion was. It's evolved like 6 different times. It used to be, are you in touch with people like that? Are you talking to these people? These are people who can take your case to the court. There's also something about trust that's going on. It used to be in my youth, when I was your age, that we had certain newspapers and television channels that we watched, each one bearing a certain kind of point of view. We knew when we read the editorial of the Wall Street Journal, which still today is very conservative. We knew that we read the rest of the paper, it was just journalistic news, holistic. They were afraid of the op-ed people, in fact. But if you read, the Post, you get you know what you're getting. Anyway, so you knew if you read the Christian Science Monitor or you read the Harlem newspaper, you knew what you were reading and you bought it for that reason. And if you were a journalist, you were reading all those papers to get all the points of view. You're talking about this bubble. What's happening here is that every single one of you, multiplied by how many, in an infinite number, all have an opinion. And you're smart, so you're sitting there, and I enjoy listening to you. But there are a lot of dumbasses out there who are putting these stupid things with the children eating God knows what on. And you know what? I am suddenly handing that to a child, because of an algorithm.
But that's your fault.
No, it is my fault.
But so what? The question is, you can't go to court, you can't say, wait a minute, they took my thing out, now I'm gonna call a BFF.
that's
The
true.
DMCA,
But
for
when
example,
is
the
reason and right?
that's a different issue,
Your
though. You're right,
rights.
that's what it is,
America's
a society.
we're very big on
Where is the
rights.
law? Where is it, what do you do? Do you have any right? Yes, you're right about that.
But what about reasonableness?
Aside
What
from
about
reasonableness,
ethics?
aside
What
from
about
that,
philosophy
why,
of life?
aside from that,
What
do
about
you have a
the
right
point
to-
of view that we should strive for?
different argument.
It's not a different argument.
We're not talking about it.
I'm suggesting that they should be merged.
We're not no, what I'm
Yes,
saying is,
because the
if you
law-
are, okay, if you just
the
said what
law-
you just said right now,
Just a second.
and
Ryan.
Twitter
May
decided
I-
to shut you down,
You have a microphone.
sorry,
Let me get back to this.
No, 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 no. No, she can finish. Excuse me, please let the lady finish over there.
They wouldn't have had a models release.
No.
Those videos
All right, all right.
were legal.
The whole point is that we made laws with reasonable people who created a world that came from people who thought we were gonna act with reason. And when we were out of that reasonableness, out of that sense of a child knows right and wrong. A child knows when they're doing something naughty, when they take the cookie or when they do something like pull the cat's tail. They know it. And then they kind of see what mommy's gonna do or daddy's gonna do. We know when we're not putting, we know what's right and wrong. The right to put all this crap on the air, yes, have the right, but when that idiot who likes those pictures back 40 years ago or 20 years ago when none of the internet was around for me to have to see it, I don't wanna see the guy putting a child eating feces.
I think you're making a very good
Dear
point.
God, let it
I think-
it's more
I don't
friends.
think they were willing participants.
No, I don't wanna see these things. We have to have
I
some
think that
sense
your
of
point
reasonableness.
is very good. That part of the problem is it's a decay of our capacity to reason and act ethically as a society. It's like atrophying, and somehow the social media system is actually accelerating that atrophication.
I totally.
And we don't quite know what to do with it. So let's just acknowledge that we don't quite know what to do about it. And I don't think that, I mean, even when you were describing, it didn't seem to me like terrible. You know, it felt to me like there's like a system that's trying to figure out, like an immune system, how to react. So yeah, like people report something and it's wrong, they're human, they get carried away. The next day there's a retraction, YouTube is somehow connected to these more established forms of information brokering, and they pull it and then put it back on. It doesn't seem to me, catastrophic. They never put it, back on, or if they took you off YouTube entirely, that would certainly be, and it's obviously important that people are looking at this and testing the limits of it and so on. That's part of the process. I think on a deeper level, the problem is that we're all like alienated individuals in this huge society that's got out of control without any community structures. Like, I think in the past, it'd be the community that would sort of hold people accountable. That would maybe there would be some form of my views have gone crazy, therefore my neighbors aren't listening to me anymore. Or they don't, or they're not, or they're, that nobody wants to hang out with me. Now people are going crazy in these isolated silos, and they're just screaming online, and they're finding other lunatics who listen to that screaming. And unfortunately, I'm a little afraid that platforms like mine maybe help amplify that a little bit.
Sticks, your gears are probably turning right now as far as what you're going to talk about. One thing that I would really like for you to address is, do you see there being a shadowy catastrophe coming with this disillusion? Or do you see in the next generation, the generation that, for example, listens to you, something else sprouting, something that we may have lost?
I would say simply that we need to determine where we're going to go as a society. Things tend towards polarization, that much is clear. We have to determine, are we going to throttle the entire internet, throttle the information on it, and a lot of people who create content? Now, or are we going to have more or less a free and open internet? I think Lionel was touching on something important. That is, there's a differentiation between your right, specifically and legally speaking, to use a platform like YouTube and Twitter. And I would say the pragmatic side of it, which is, should these platforms, is it sane? Is it a good idea for them to engage in censorship? I still think that there's an opportunity for simply grassroots support to prevent the worst aspects of censorship. It's not a case where you have to have either total lawlessness or, total authoritarian nanny state YouTube. It's a case where YouTube already had rules against the kind of content that we're discussing. It already would have been determined as spam. It's just that nobody wanted to touch the issue The people that did tend to touch that issue tended to be on the fringe of YouTube, in some cases ideologically, and then they were targeted for bringing it up, probably by the same people making money off that nonsense. Meanwhile, though, we've got NGOs that fundamentally, instead of looking at tidal waves of spam, protecting children, protecting people, sex trafficking, stuff like that, instead of focusing on legitimate issues on YouTube that clog up the platform or are criminal, they're worried about something that's could be construed as offensive. Or somebody, they fired a gun and so an algorithm determines that it's war footage, it demonetizes it. I would say I'm in perhaps a unique position compared to many creators. I've never monetized any content. I rely upon book sales and grassroots support. I never used AdSense. I'm damn glad that I didn't. That's just a part of it, though. It goes well past anything regarding money on both ends. And it goes into the realm of pure philosophy, which is it a good idea? Will the platform remain healthy? Will creators be able to make ends meet, put their stuff out there? And is it sane and moral to algorithmically demote, to demonetize, to begin striking people's stuff down? I'm seeing some of these groups, they sit there crowing. They're like, oh, our algorithm, 83% of the time it gets it right on hate speech, you know, whatever that amounts to according to their standards. 83%. So roughly 1 out of 5 times it fails and it gives somebody a strike for something that's totally innocuous. That doesn't make me sleep very well at night, thinking about spending a decade. I've been on YouTube for a decade. I'm making content there. I've been on Facebook for a decade, Twitter only, I think 2 years now, actually, at this point. I'm making all this content. I have no specific guarantee that some random rogue staffer doesn't decide they don't like me and kicks me off of a platform, or some algorithm gets it totally wrong, and maybe I stop being able to post for a week.
I mean, as Lionel kind of mentioned, I mean, YouTube and Google are not public infrastructure also. They're private companies that, yeah, we do also have the right, you could start your own, open source platform, or, I'm sorry if that does happen to you unfairly or something, yeah, but these are not like, these are arbitrary brokers, they're private companies.
Well, that's
that have taken the place of public utilities in some sense.
Are they also quasi-governmental entities as well? Like, how much influence does the government have on these companies?
Like giving them seed money to start? Are you kidding? Aside from that? Well, I bring up a good point. We had this way back, and he can go to bring this back to our constitutional forebears. They had this idea of the government, but now we have this particular thing here. And now we got to ask ourselves, what about surveillance? What about surveillance and rights and privacy? And who gets to see this stuff? Again, the government loves to sit back and say, it's not us, it's Apple, or take it up with Sprint, or whoever it was. We're in this unique world right now, this weird, as you say, quasi-government, where these organizations are so big, so large, so plenary, so ubiquitous, that we're going to ask ourselves, ask courts, legislation perhaps, to reconsider these people as almost being quasi-governmental, and to apply the First Amendment the same way. Because if all of a sudden, if I say, listen, we don't like your book, for whatever reason, and I decide I'm Google, and it's gone, in some respects, it just disappeared. And you can say, no, it's still there, you can find it. So the question is, when something is of that size, that enormity, are we going to have to regroup? And what everybody said as far as society going to hell in a handbasket, agreed 100%. We're decadent, we're fetid, we're odious, we're horrid. I understand that. But the question I have too is, when do we say, how do we ever benefit by saying no? You can't say that. And forget the extreme, kids eating feces and that sort of thing, child pornography. When do we somehow just say, you know what, we're going to err on the side of just letting people say everything, and let the community perhaps do something, or with some grassroots.
Although we also have another issue coming up, which is deep fake. I mean, the fact that now there's not going to be any capacity to tell if a video is real or not. So there'll be a video of Obama, noshing on Jewish babies or something, and it'll look just like Obama. And you can be sure that is going to be weaponized by all sorts of horrible.
Yeah, actually, that capability is pretty well done.
Oh, it exists right now.
This is a great discussion, but maybe supplanted by the real fake stuff that's generated by AI.
Adobe also is working on fake Photoshop right now. Basically, it's a vocal version of Photoshop, and apparently they're going to be able to emulate people's voices within the next 5 years.
Or just the CIA that created fake beheading videos. Like the Pentagon has its own propaganda wing. No, but I'm saying it. It's another example, which is very frightening because then our government uses that as evidence to
Government
perpetuate
uses
more.
everything.
Yeah,
I have
right, but my
services.
point being that is really horrifying because they are then in control of the missiles. I mean, I can post a fake video of me eating a baby, I can't also launch a missile.
So what are you guys gonna do?
Well, I have an answer.
Come closer to the mic if you could.
I have an answer for
Right up here.
the fake digital content that can be out there, right? One of which is the blockchain. Because right now, there's technology that you can timestamp anything that's created against the blockchain. So then if you create technology, which is out here, it's easy to do, where basically take a video of something and it timestamps, okay, at that time, at that location, this is what it was. And then if there's changes at that, you could always check to see, okay, well, we know that this thing was modified after it was originally made. So there's a way in technology to deal with fake digital content.
Wouldn't that require every reporting device to be connected to the internet as before?
Yeah, and they more or less are already, right?
But that requires.
If it's against the blockchain, it's centralized.
If.
No, it is. It just is. I mean, that's what it was designed to be. So that's that. And then I think
There's not
other,
just one blockchain, there's many blockchains.
there are, but I'm just, now we're talking about more details. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
there's a
versioning
solution.
systems.
There's a
using
solution. Yeah, there's a
as much as we
solution.
can, yeah.
There's a solution. The other thing I want to touch on is, I think the main issue is accountability. And I think what you were referring to earlier about the trolling, right? No one trolls you like they do in real life as they do online because they don't feel that accountability. And that's why I think that
You
people.
probably just closed it. He's fine.
I think when we're talking about free speech or any sort of freedom to do something, we're all free to do whatever, right? Now there's levels of accountability for that. I'm free to go murder somebody, but if I'm caught, I go to jail, right? It's just, I'm accountable for it. If I'm not caught, I don't go to jail, but there's nothing prohibiting me from doing that. And people can say and do things that are disgusting. And now we have to decide, okay, are we going to allow them to be accountable? And is it the social platform, be it Facebook or Google or this, that causes that? Or is it our society that's going to rise up and say, you know what, this, even if we disagree with it, it's fine, but this content, because it's just objectively obscene, these people need to be accountable for. So that's what I just want to touch upon those two issues.
Before we go to Q&A, I would like to ask everybody in the panel, what do you guys think is going to be happening in the future as far as the next generation, Generation Z? What are they going to experience? Are they going to be any different from us as far as the way they look at the world? So I would like to start from Daniel and just go around to the panel and find out.
I can't really, I don't know, but I have a daughter in high school, is that Generation Z?
Yeah.
I mean, they seem pretty nice so far. But I guess I'm more concerned about, some of these issues. I mean, I do think, I think that, what that man just brought up around the blockchain is interesting. That I don't think there's necessarily a technological solution, except maybe we can use the blockchain to create networks of trust, so that people have some kind of verification that goes back to some type of source. Because with the swapping of fake news and now deep fake video, and all the alienation, atrophication of civic discourse, leading to all these maniacs getting all this attention, we've got some serious problems. And I do hope technology can be used in a wiser way to resolve them. I'm just not sure that that's the case.
I want to say something first. I think YouTube overall is a net positive. And often we have these conversations where we just rag on the things they're doing wrong. And as much as they have done wrong, I'm grateful and I benefit greatly being on YouTube, as well as many other social platforms. So just because we bring up these issues we want fixed doesn't mean we think the platform is bad. No, it means we want to make sure it stays good. Now, as for the future, I can't make any, I hate making predictions, but one thing that really scares me is that either we're going to see the divide keep getting worse and worse, because we're to a point where people don't even want to talk to each other. We see an article where they call Sargon of Akkad right wing when he's clearly not, and that poisons the well. Now people are going to say, oh, okay, I'm not going to watch that guy's video. He's the other. And if that continues and gets worse and worse and worse, then what's going to happen to the next generation? Or these kids, like every generation in the past, says the adults are really stupid. Screw you. I'm going to do my own thing, and maybe It's solved simply because they think we're all idiots.
I think there's a momentum generally towards more open cooperative structures. And there's even evolutionary reasons for that, Daniel and I have talked about before. So similar to what happened with Wikipedia disintermediated all those, Encarta, all those encyclopedias that no one ever uses anymore. Not that Wikipedia is like the ultimate source of information, but a small open source cooperative structure is a top 10 website. So that's going to start happening probably with money, with social media, with every, probably farming, probably all different practices. So like Tim's saying, these platforms are, they're useful to a degree. We're on a Google Hangout right now. I mean, you have to give them credit for that to a certain degree, but the problem is that it's not free software. There's ridden with surveillance. So it's all totally nuanced, and we just have to keep building a better version of what they've created, because they're not making the moves to change it in the right direction fast enough. So we have to. It would be nice if they would just open up everything, open source everything, stop surveilling, so that we could actually stop spending our time and energy trying to catch up to them and build more ethical versions of what they've already created. So they're sort of, I think they're putting a restriction on evolution by making everyone, like, keeping it secret essentially. So it's, but it's inevitable. We're moving.
Well, real quick to answer your question, what am I gonna do about it? I'm gonna keep doing what I have been doing, which is exposing that shit. Since we've already cursed, I'm just gonna keep going. Well, but that's what I work to do every day. And I would ask that everybody be more engaged. I think somebody on the panel mentioned that, like, you kind of have to ask people to do something. Like, I know that your news just comes to you and that's really nice, but like, we do have to be our own journalists and our own critics and be able to look at something. Like they did a survey in middle schoolers, like 80% of them were not able to tell the difference between a native ad and an actual article that was real news. So this is problematic, and that's not to say that I think the next generation is doomed. I have hope, but no optimism. I don't think that everything's just gonna be fine because evolution. I think that we can make things better, but it requires a lot of work. And we have to be willing to do that work, particularly when we have these platforms that can perpetuate bullshit just as easily and as readily as they can perpetuate actual news and the beautiful ability to let somebody know what's happening thousands of miles away and outside of their purview. And with that, I will also say that as an organizer and as somebody who has visited people personally, I think that despite the fact that social media platforms are brilliant, there is something to be said for in-person and face-to-face organizing. And I think that with regards to reaching out to extremists or people that, post things that they hate all Jews or all Black people, like, I think that some of the work that needs to be done there will need to happen face-to-face and will need to happen on the front line, so to speak, of these issues as
well. This is the greatest thing that ever happened in my lifetime. I love this. For all the bad, I will take all the bad over when I grew up, which I thought was great. It wasn't really that great. We had a library, nobody knew anything. But when my question is, first of all, when Generation Z have kids, what are their kids called? Anyway, just a question. When we were kids, there was no such thing as a peanut allergy. Never heard of it. Every nut allergies, tree allergy. Now there's more allergies. I want this generation, because they were born in captivity, they've never known freedom, they don't know what 1984 is, they don't know who Orwell is, Orwellian dystopia, they don't know anything about having their limitations to their speech, their location known. I want them to have a new allergy, and that is to somebody say, you can't say that. And I want them immediately to say, whoa, who said that? Not what was the topic, but who said you can't say that? Don't you want to hear what the topic is? Not necessarily. Who said you can't say it? Why can't you say it? Is it the government? Is it YouTube? Is it my school? Is it who? Who said it? Is this organization? We're losing that. Because the argument is that, well, that is kind of racist. And, that's not the point. Because it's what you call it. Because I'm gonna turn around, I'm gonna call what you're saying racist as well. I want there to be an allergy towards somebody saying you can't say something. Doesn't mean it's gonna be awful. Sometimes you're gonna hear every bit of dread and crap that people spew, but I would rather do that than live in a world where we're becoming more habituated to limitation of speech, where we're tolerating any kind of censorship. Governmental, platform, organizational, doesn't matter. Even these laws that say you can't, or here in New York, you can't have sugar. We had a sugar ban. You can't do this, and you gotta compost. We had a law in the city of New York, Operation Latch On. They came along and said women in hospitals, in city hospitals, if they wanted to not breastfeed, which last time I checked was their right, we had Mayor Bloomberg who said no. Hide formula. This is the mayor of New York telling women they can't breastfeed. We're becoming more and more habituated to being told no, to stifle. That's all I want. I want them to have an allergy toward being told they can't say something. That's all.
It sticks?
I would say that in the short term, I'm pessimistic towards any given individual, because what I see is a severe amount of suppression, a severe crackdown, not just online, but in culture in general. It goes towards the larger problem of what Lionel's talking about. People post 9/11 really, I think, really have come accustomed to the concept that they need to be kept safe. And it's morphed beyond being kept safe from some vacuous concept of an extremist, a physical other, towards ideas itself that may themselves be extreme or labeled as such. Long term, though, over the next few years, you'd say after 2 or 3, I'm actually very optimistic about our chances, because I think the amount of growth just in the last couple of years towards people realizing that we do have a cultural problem has grown so rapidly. It's no longer just partisan. It's not just, you know, Eurosceptics or a new right or something like that. It's gone beyond that into a cultural zeitgeist of sorts. And I think the reason for this is really that we're at the end of a political and social paradigm. I think if we look at what's happening in the world, that's a symptom of that. That's a good thing. I think it reforms the left, makes them less censorious. Maybe it reforms aspects of the right. It could be a very good thing for the world, but we've got to march through fire and hell for several years. And in that given period of time, more abuse from corporations, opportunists that don't themselves care about the moral side of issue. You'd think of a Sarkeesian, maybe, or a Dunham. They will continue to try to abuse people in order to justify, I think, their own existence.
Thank you, and with that, we go to the Q&A. Whoever wants to. Tico, you want the mic?
Sure. As Terence McKenna said, culture is not your friend. We are in a deep state of being stuck in a cult of deceit. And Americans, unfortunately, and most of the world has been deceived and lied to for many decades. So pre-internet, think about it. Most of the corporate media that was happening was bombarding homes with images of war and mayhem in Vietnam. The media lied us into war against its weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And it's okay to show gore and war and bombings of innocent people, and later to find out that we were lied to. So a lot of this dumbing down of society is perpetrated by, whether it be the CIA Mockingbird or governments around the world to strip us from the power that we have and within each of us. We're all divine beings. We all have the cosmic spark within us where we can elevate our consciousness and really guide the evolution of humanity without being told by these bureaucrats and control freaks and egomaniacs as to what is good for us or what is not good for us. We're being lied on the big pharma side. And think about it, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or the institutions of government, of organized religions, of banking cartels, and a military industrial complex. Those are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So either we grow up and truly take our power back as starseeds of consciousness, or we will diminish and go down a spiral of self-destruction on our own, being guided and controlled by these forces and in these institutions. So my question to each of you is, how do you individually come into your own power, and into your own community? What is it that you do to elevate the consciousness of those that you love and those in the community that you are part of? Thank you.
I mean, I guess, my biggest effort in that regard was creating a company and a social network. There was a company called Evolver, it's still up, I'm just not actively involved with it anymore, but, web magazine called Reality Sandwich, so we kind of like trying to spread ideas of the cultural paradigm. And we had a social movement called the Evolvers Network, and we created local community groups. We supported the creation with volunteers, and we had like 50 or 70 local groups. We would do monthly events around different themes, ranging from permaculture, shamanism, to local currencies, with the idea of like creating nodes and alternative culture. And it was just very difficult to get funding for it. It was, and so ultimately, we kind of abandoned that project in a certain respect. And I'm still very sad about it because, it feels like what's happening in the US is, in a way, like this alt-right thing is the only thing that has cultural energy in like, particularly in the red states. We're kind of like cultural deserts. So people are graduating to, it's almost like the punk rock, thing, where people just graduate to the thing that's extremist, that gives them some kind of voice, some kind of sense of holding on to something. And we really need nodes of an alternative paradigm that, is more transformative, more communal oriented, more oriented towards everything that you just spoke about. So that's my shtick.
I'm a journalist, so I think, I make a video every day about some prominent issue, and then every so often I try to, as much as possible, travel around the world and go on the ground to actually explore, experience, and then share what is happening, at least from my personal point of view, and looking at statistics, talking with people, and then hopefully, I used to work in nonprofits, as I mentioned before, and that's a soul-crushing job. A lot of people think nonprofits sound so great, but when you're working in fundraising, what really happens is you start to just, people become numbers, they become donors, and then you realize that most of these big nonprofits, I'm not gonna name anybody, but name the biggest one that you think is great, they're probably just trying to take care of themselves. They got an executive director making $1 million+, and it's just a horrible business. And I felt, when you have these organizations that are willing to lie, mislead, distort because they want to just maintain their existence, or because they think they're the righteous ones, that God is on their side, it just became depressing. And I figured, you know what? Maybe I can just go around and tell people what I see happening, and then try and break things down and, to the best of my ability, remove extreme biases from a lot of these stories. But I'm not perfect. I do what I can, I guess.
But I think I want to focus more on this and offline stuff, and actually helping guide people to offline, like face-to-face stuff that Eleanor was talking about. I think that is definitely how to transform more extremist stuff on both sides. And then, additionally, just helping people understand that the time that we spend online it matters, and like the places that you visit matter, and the place that you give clicks and give your energy matters. Like that is actually what manifests power structures on the internet. So, don't use all the old stuff, like we all have to a certain degree, but it's really important to give at least some amount of your energy towards the new emerging platforms, and then being offline as much as you can too.
So I'm a journalist as well. I'm also an activist and an organizer, and so I try to, also as a creative activist, I try to use creative mediums to promote socio-political change. So that's what I do on a daily basis. And I also think, to Daniel's point, that the alt-right has created a culture. There are a lot of other cultures that have created, but not created, but they're being noticed. For example, we're all white on this stage. But I think that what Black Lives Matter has created, what the indigenous movements have created from Standing Rock to Louisiana, I think those are cultures and movements and messages that are becoming part of the zeitgeist. So it's not just the alt-right, and I think that's important to note, because I think that the next generation is also latching on to these new cultural ideas as well. that are gaining popularity and gaining steam. So
Just a quick jump in on that. I just think it's really important to understand the nuance involved in, when you're talking about the alt-right or Black Lives Matter or indigenous movements, like these are not black and white movements in themselves. Antifa, whatever it is, they're all extremely complex with many different factions inside of them. So it's not just X is good, Y is bad. We have to keep digging in to what is good and what is bad in each of these.
Oh yeah, I was just pointing
No, I
out that
wasn't
they're not
taking
the
it.
only movement that's gaining steam or popularity.
Yeah, for sure.
The very fact that you're here tonight gives me a great sense of hope. Do you know how many people there are in the world? And how many people that we know, where you ask them, did you have an argument with somebody today? Did you talk about something political? Did you say something right? Somebody will say, no. You know what we're talking about tonight on TV? The weather, the snow. Oh, for God's sakes, it's gonna snow, get over it. For 30 years, I started when talk radio, remember that? Talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, this was the biggest thing, and for 30 years I've been through, for every argument there is, the fairness doctrine, you gotta live through that one. But I have spent all of my adult waking hours in one form or another talking about something, arguing, whatever. And I will say this with all due respect, I love you all, I don't care what you think. I thought you were gonna come to blows, you two before, about Antifa. It was music to my ears. And you, sir, I have no idea what you said. But it was said. But there's a brilliance in the fact that we're not talking about the weather. Here we are, we're doing something, all of us in our own little ways. Look at Sticks. There isn't a bomb shelter, bless his heart. And he is doing, we are talking to computers, and I'm talking about things, the complexities of stuff, and I'm wondering, what am I doing? Here I am, and I can't help it. It's like we were born to do this. Just respect what people are saying. You don't have to agree with it. Just do what I do. Just say, interesting, and move on, and laugh behind your back. But that's what we do. Because there are people that I know who say, what do you think about this? No, seriously, what's your passion? What pisses you off? What is it? You're an activist. You know how many de-activists I know? People they don't know. They're lethargic, they're torpid, they're just, it's not that they've given up. I don't know if it's a fluoride in the water. That's what it is. And the fact that you said that, the fact that this reminds me of like the 60s, because I remember I was kind of a kid. But there was this thing where we talked about love and peace and anti-war, and it was serious, and music was politics. It was I guess I'm going back to that. So the fact that we're here today is hope. It's everybody did what we did, just had an opinion about something and kept up and got in people's faces and drove people nuts. I'm sure we all have family members that go, oh God, here he comes again. Here we go with that. That's what change. That's what change is about. That's what this is about. And remember, don't ever let anybody tell you you can't speak. That's all I'm saying. Say whatever it is, no matter how insane it is. But I'd rather you say it than not be able to. That's it.
Yeah.
Sticks?
I would say paired with that, it's just the spread of education, of information in general through the internet has become such a massive juggernaut. And it's a great thing. It's not just politics. It's not just society. That's certainly being driven by it and driving the conversation. Everything, spirituality certainly is part of this. Literature is now far more widely available than at any other time in human history. Up until about 30 years ago, it was basically print. That's all you had for the most part. You might be able to get something, you could print it out maybe at home, less expensively, but ultimately, it was physical copies and you couldn't really find it even on the early internet. Now you can find anything. You can find absolutely any text that you want. It's 2,000 years old. Somebody scanned it from some library collection and they've put it on archive.org or any of a million other sites. It's a juggernaut of information. The worst thing that we could possibly do at this point is let up when we are developing now the next wave of tech. Mr. Amen developing mines, Gab is there. You've got fundraising platforms. You've got video hosting alternatives. These are all great things, I think, for the development not just of culture and of politics and the critique of society. but for everything else under the sun as well. We can't let up, and we have to work as hard as we can towards these things. And that depends on a person's skills too. One person might be very good at speaking. Another person might be very good at writing. They might not share that in common. Another person may be good at, maybe they grow things. Another person's really good at designing fabrics or making clothes. All of these things can be found online. And I think that's the best thing for the world.
Thank you. And now we have a question over here with the gentleman. I will move the.
First of all, Sticks, I'd like to thank you for broadcasting yourself and to the capital of capitalism itself, New York. Also, on top of that, I have a question about the overall global state of the internet itself. Right now, as we speak, global penetration rate of broadband is around 50%. About half the world's population does not have an internet connection as of this point. If you remember, in the early 90s to, I'm going to say the early 2000s, the left and the establishment pushed for broadband expansion across the globe. Right now, the United States is somewhere around 80% broadband penetration. Do you think there'll be a slowdown in broadband penetration considering the fact that they've seen things such as WikiLeaks using the internet as a platform against the establishment? Thank you.
Go for it, Stace.
I think in general, there won't be a slowdown of the growth of the internet because it's beginning to move into areas where that penetration is a lot less, like maybe parts of Eastern Europe. I can remember maybe 10 years ago or something on some of the first blogging endeavors that I used. There was a thing called revolver maps. I'm not sure if they're even still active because I haven't used it in a while. And you'd look, and if you looked at where people were connecting to your content from, it was fairly popular at the time, literary content mostly. If you looked at where they were connecting from, it was the United States was lit up like a Christmas tree, Western Europe, Oceania, Japan a bit, and there were large gaps in the world where there wasn't much going on. Fast forward even 2 or 3 years, and you saw it substantially growing, and it's growing Eastern Europe, Latin America, parts of West Africa, certainly parts of Southeast Asia. And in many cases, it's maybe small towns or outlying communities that lacked basic functions like even maybe electricity in some cases before. I don't think there will be a slowdown in the next 10 to 20 years, except that the audience in the U.S., places that were already developed, certainly the growth there will slow down. I think you're going to get increasingly more translating software and things of that nature as well. That's something that alt tech should look into, building into their sites the ability of people to seamlessly translate things, because a lot of those countries are not English speaking. I think that would be highly beneficial over time.
Who's next?
Anybody want to add to that, or just the next question? All right, next question. Gentleman in the blue.
Hi, what's your take on some words that come by so quickly, guys? Soy Boy, All Right, Trump Tards. I feel like the internet has become like its own form of society. I know that in some of your videos of Sticks where, you have 10.2, like, it's really funny and all, but, it's, it's like its own subculture in a sense. And I just want to know what your take on that.
I would say I really love I've got the best fans. I'm just going to say that straight up, not to throw shade at anyone, but I get the best fans. The Spoon Clank and 10.2 and stuff like that, it brings endless amusement when people make cartoons. Because I'm not moralistic, because I don't care if things are irreverent or blasphemous, or even if they insult me, I have a great time even when people make, sly asides about me that would be seen as negative. Any sort of attention in that field helps to promulgate my message. And ultimately, that's a good thing because I fight for people to be able to promulgate all messages. Even if a person has beliefs, opinions that are offensive, that I even disagree with, I would be willing to debate them on the point. I think that's something that's different from a lot of people in the what I call the lamestream in the establishment. They're not willing to debate any points. They think that if you disagree with them, you're too far out there. It doesn't really matter what direction you're coming from. As for some of the monikers that have been made, like Trump Tard and things like that, they can be disrespectful, certainly, but I think that they should be totally allowed.
Anybody else want to add on that, or just next question?
Evening. Hi.
Excellent.
You're welcome.
On one hand, this is what we're doing right now. It's probably old school in the best thing an alternative are doing. We're having FaceTime. This is what was done prior to internet. This is what people did. We agreed or disagreed, but you put one foot forward. You made history with this, or figured something out, or at least came with a balance. In the beginning, the internet was great, easy, resourceful, made it cocooning, but regardless of what your culture or political, it's also separated us. And we become cocooned and fearless when we're behind a big glass box. But if you can see what's happening now, a lot of people are scared to talk to each other. There's more loneliness as much as we think we have 5,000 friends. True. It's funny, I also think that the Trump administration could be the best thing that's ever happened, only because it's finally, only because so much shit is finally rubbled up that finally people have to speak up. And this president really didn't say or do anything, period. Not even good or bad. From Me Too, from women's rights, from everything, it seemed like everybody else spoke up because nothing else did it. Maybe it finally came to a bubble. My question to you is, does everybody have an opinion? Are we gonna have more FaceTime like this? Are we gonna have more people time? Or is there something more powerful than us, more powerful than the go, that's actually watching all this craziness and feeding more into it? Are they gonna distract it with silly reality shows while they figure something out so there's finally a totalitarian something? Or are we just going through growing pains?
Oh, I don't know, that was a lot. I just wanted to kind of bring up, I don't know if it fits exactly, but you mentioned something bigger, controlling things. And there was some other stuff mentioned earlier. I just want to say, it is remarkably easy for one person to have a dramatic impact on the entire planet. And I think a lot of people don't realize this, because I've had these discussions where they assume that if you're not super wealthy, if you're not more powerful than the government, I think one of the reasons we've seen the government go after hackers so heavily in the past several years is because you will, I mean, look, there's this guy named Weave, and I don't know how true the story is, but apparently he called Pakistan pretending to be India. He spoofed the phone number of the ambassador and threatened nuclear war. It's just one guy with a spoofing app. Like, it doesn't need to be a power greater than the government to produce propaganda or dictate us or try and create a totalitarian system. It could be a very small group of powerless people who have power now that we have the internet.
And I'd also like to point out that the online and offline aren't necessarily mutually exclusive places. I know a programmer who created a website where people can find if there's anybody in their community that they can meet up with and talk politics. So you can use online platforms in order to create the face-to-face presence that I do think is required to have these important conversations, because like you said, everyone's safe behind the computer. So I think, like, in terms of greater powers, it's hard to even say this without sounding trite, but I think the power of people working together towards a goal and working in solidarity with one another on a wide range of issues to better their community, to better their, existence, is that higher power, so to speak. And I think that combined with the online and offline worlds will be what takes us forward.
Since the beginning of time, whenever anybody's added something to our little palette, they've said, this is horrible. As soon as there was the train, the Iron Horse, this is the worst. What do you mean it connected us? No, we're leaving and families are broken apart. You name it. I'm sure the person who said, look, I've got this thing called a knife. You could cut things with it like it's skin. I'm sure he was stabbed immediately thereafter. So we've been talking about this since day one. There's always been this terrible thing about, but there's this, I'm not here by the way, but there's this interesting paradox which I find fascinating. We have the library in Alexandria in our pocket. How many times have you been someplace and you said, when did Newt Rockney die? You said, who the hell is Newt Rockney? Just a minute, and I've got this answer. And yet we know nothing. We write constantly and can't write. We can't write. The love letter, the what? The love, nobody's writing, but we're writing constantly. No, we're not. These are glyphs and whatever. So there's this wonderful paradox. There's this wonderful, and there's this weird thing about taking this separation. Because one of these days when you're going to be found guilty, when we go to RFID chips, I'm gonna be crazy for a moment. And we have little chips in us and kids are gonna stand in line and wait and they go, look at this, here I am, I don't need a wallet, I've got this chip in my hand, I've got everything. No more easy pass, look at me, hey, look, Bob's coming, why? Because he's got the chip, this is great. And then one day when they find you guilty of something, you're gonna go to a judge and he's not gonna put you in jail, he's gonna just turn your chip off and you're not going to exist. And we're gonna sit back in a club like this and say, how in the hell did this happen? This is the part of being cursed with having a brain, having an imagination, being able to marvel at technology, but also being scared, witless as to how this thing is, where we're going. It's what, would you ever want to go back? Let me just say something quickly. This got out of the government's hands. I don't know how they turned their back. DARPA wasn't paying attention, and we had it. And they've been trying to claw this thing back through CISPA, through DMCA, which I've had problems with that, copyright, intellectual property laws, you name it, bullying, libel, Yelp libel. Yo, I didn't like your tacos, you're gonna sue me? They're trying to claw this thing back, and they're doing everything in their power. But was there any of us here tonight who would ever want to give this back and go back 30 years ago? Is there anybody, despite everything that we've said? Anybody?
Sometimes I want a telephone attached to my fucking wall so I can find it and not follow it. I mean, I'll walk around with, people say I've been calling all day. I said, well, I forgot I turned my phone down when I was at the studio.
Aside from that.
There were more reasons I want to go back. What
you
we're not addressing here is that we're all building these cocoons online. And they're being built for us when we use Google and we're doing it in social media. People are not being conversant. They're swapping opinions.
Raise your hand. Who wants to go
How
back?
do you get
Who wants to go
dialogue
back? Time
going?
capsule back 50 years. Anybody where we're all conversing and we don't? Anybody want you?
I would go back. You should let me finish my sentence.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
No, it's gone.
Well, like, I don't think that they have to be mutually exclusive. Like the fact that you can go online and create meetup groups, you can go online and create protests, like Facebook events that happen in real life. Like they don't, or not Facebook events because screw Facebook, but you get the idea. Like you can use the online platform in order to create real life instances. So is that what necessarily what people use the internet for? No, but the point is that you don't have, it's not just like going back or going forward. You can use the internet to create those spaces that you had before the internet.
I don't have a choice, so I can't go back.
Why don't you have a
But
choice?
Can I make it 50 years ago? That's not possible. But, and I don't have a choice but to use this, and I use it more often than I'd like to. But I find that sometimes I'm attached to it, and I find that I look at it, I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I look at. I look at it right before I go to bed. The second I get out of work, it's in my hand, and I know that that's not just me. Most of my social interactions are with this. I don't think it's healthy.
That's why I said this is the new nicotine. People used to wake up and have a cigarette in the morning, there were commercials for that.
But you can just,
I don't even think it's a new nicotine.
I
It
don't
comes in a new
have any
car.
friends.
No, I
yeah, but you said you wake up,
If
you
you
put your
look
phone
at
in.
it, I don't think it's.
You can put your phone in the other room, wake up and stare at the window.
It's a new car.
I could if I wanted.
I think it may be time for the next question.
It's the way life is now.
It's
It's the way interactions are now.
It's hard, and there's like a whole new level of self-discipline that we're not good at.
But it's
So-
not just self-discipline, I mean, to go out, to meet people, to do things like that, it's really pretty impossible to do without it. I've tried both. It's really pretty impossible to do without it in this day and age.
But I definitely used to read a lot more long books, and I do miss that.
There's a few things that I would go back to. A little, not a lot, but quite a few, and I would like to see it would be nice if Generation Z had a bit of a taste of what we had 30 years ago in the best way. No, not racism, and not violence, and not stuff that was like, oh God, this has got to stop. There were certain things that were great.
Like music? Well, it is happening. There's a new like dumb phone.
And a telephone where, hey, you wanna go out? There wasn't,
No, but that's coming,
or anything like that.
there's new products coming out that are actually going back to that. It's like new versions of old products, like where a phone where you can, it's a new version of phone where all you can do is text and call. Or, so there will be modern versions kind of clinging back to that
And it's
prior
fine,
thing.
you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Again, we don't really have to, but maybe sometimes go back some ways to a little bit of songs of wood. I love technology, I love progress. He mentioned music. Yeah, you know what? Today, we can take our music collection with us, and it could be 10,000, whatever, we can take it across the street on vacation, and it'd still be safe at home at the same time. 30 years ago, no, you had to have a truck.
Before we move on to the next question, Styx, do you have any comments?
Yes, I would say as someone who proudly has never owned a smartphone and who tries not to carry his cheap-ass track phone anywhere if I can't, can't be bothered to because I never use it. I don't really care. It's just for emergencies. I would say the internet, in some cases, can really be helpful for coordinating people's social interactions. For instance, I live in an area that's fairly rural. There aren't that many people physically around me. Now, what's the guarantee that any of those people has anything significantly enough in common with me at all for me to form, maybe a friendship stronger than, hey, how's the weather? Hey, how's it hanging by? There's no guarantee of that. You're in most of you, I assume, live in or around the New York metro region. Well, that's a very large place. There are, I think, 15, 20 million people within the metro area. Here, it's small town America. There's, I think, a bit of a cultural difference between the two. But I'm not glued to my phone. I think that increasingly we're seeing perhaps that people are coming unglued from such things, but they've got to be there. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. This is now the main form of human communication. It's no longer interpersonal.
There are pros and there's cons to it. It's created stronger connections between some people over longer distances. But at the same time, I think one of the problems we are seeing, if I could be a little negative, because I love mobile technology, I love the internet, but I just want to point out that it seems like we are moving in a direction where people are actually shocked if you talk to them in real life. A buddy of mine made a video where he's like in the New York subway, and he's like, you look around at the how many million people travel on the subway, never once look at each other, talk to each other, and here they are in the same city, probably working right next to each other, and never once say, how you doing?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that Styx doesn't have a cell phone is, that's evidence that it can be done. I mean, he's a major public figure on YouTube, embracing the technology, but also simultaneously having the discipline to control his own life. So
It's a
that's cool.
Don't worry.
Envision a future where we would retreat from some technologies. I visited the Hopi Indians in Arizona, and one of the elders was talking about how their culture had been diminished by the roads, which allowed for cars to travel between the different bases. And I was like, okay, they forced these roads on you, the US government kind of forced them on you, what would you do? And he was like, oh, well, I'd smash them up. And I realized I'd never in my life thought about the idea that you could smash up a road and just go back. And actually, if people began to realize that they had lost, significant kind of aspects of maybe, being able to have deeper connection, deeper communion, it might be that in some future point, we'll want to become almost like post-technological. And we'll think about, if I visited Amazonian tribes in the rainforest, and, their culture is so incredibly rich in so many levels compared to ours, including their connection to nature and visionary technologies like ayahuasca and so on. That, in a way, we can be seen as a much poorer culture, much more monoculture, much more trapped in very limited relationship to a very ecologically reduced environment. So anyway, it's something to think about.
I wanted to point out one thing too of why I would never go back. One thing, this information was really profound to me, because I never really thought about it. I don't know if it matters to you, but lethal crime and death have gone down significantly because of cell phone technology. 50 years ago, if someone got stabbed or shot or fell down and hit their head, how long until paramedics could arrive on scene? Today, we all have cell phones, and it's very, very quick relative to how it used to be. So I think we can consider that as a really powerful net positive. We save a lot of lives.
All right, so you want to do 3 more?
Yeah, let's do 3 more. Lewis, you're up.
Yeah, sure.
So it seems pretty obvious to me that we're on the cusp of a meme revolution and thus a meme war. So this question is for Mr. Pinchbeck and Styx specifically. I would like you to talk a little bit about how memetics, censorship, and the occult form our reality today, and how that's going to play out, or how that might play out in the coming years.
Styx, you want to hit that one first?
Sure. I would say that the occult melds with human psychology and with propaganda. The meme war never ended. It began and has been ongoing. It's just there was a lull there for a while because I think the establishment looked at what was happening, realized how quickly things were moving, got so confused it didn't even bother to respond right away. They were sweating bullets. They had to regroup before they could formulate a strategy. But propaganda is very much in implementation right now by corporations, by political powers. And it's on both ends. There are those that attempt to employ these things in order to perpetuate freedom, maybe rip apart the old establishment because we're like, well, they start wars and do crazy things. So, we're tired of that now. And then there are people on the other side. They're like, no, we've built this multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. We can't let it get pissed away. So we have to do something about this. Memetics, in the strictest sense, is, as far as spiritual memetics go, is the hijacking of the reasoning mechanisms of a person's brain. Thus, you can cause strange associations within their mind between things that are technically not related. You can certainly, there are all sorts of techniques you can use. I made a post on Minds about this, I think 2 days ago. There are all sorts of things that are done by corporations, rendering people to the one-dimensional. For instance, they would say that a person is irredeemable or deplorable, you might say. And so you can simply forsake their arguments. Any other thing that they say, even if it's totally sensible and sane, it no longer matters because you've given them a one-dimensional moniker. Well, it's propaganda. It can be done in a spiritual manner too. Literally, the most obvious example was Kek. Now, I've seen write-ups about Kek. Think about this. We have this ancient Egyptian frog god being unironically referenced in mainstream publications at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and by people who are heavy-hitting career politicians whose decades might be spanned in terms of their political careers. They are unironically referencing these things. They unironically use the term meme, even if they don't really understand what it means. They talk about Pepe and a million other things. You've got them being listed as like hate symbols and all sorts of other things under the sun. Could we possibly have imagined, prior to the rise of the kind of grassroots talk we get on YouTube and elsewhere on the internet, could we possibly have imagined an election like the last one and the things surrounding it, which has now metastasized? It's gone far beyond the US to basically every corner of the world. And it's becoming a mainstream mode of human communication. The use of a symbol or a picture, a cartoon, something funny to encapsulate an idea or something along those lines is very, very common now. It wasn't really that common even a few years beforehand.
The cult is not necessarily negative, right? That a cult means hidden. And, I'm personally, from having explored shamanism and psychedelics and other types of stuff, I do believe in the occult. I believe there are these hidden dimensions that influence our human reality and work through it in different ways. And there are more positive ones and more negative ones. And they operate through a language of symbols and sometimes secret societies and so on. So I do think there's a level where that's all taking place. I'm not quite sure what else you're interested in.
I guess just talking more about like what are the systems at play and how do they affect the reality that we're all living in, this whole censorship debate, like the manipulation of information, trying to get the truth out. How do these symbols, how does this occult paradigm or the hidden knowledge play into all of this?
Well, the occult has always propped up the concept of liberty. In the strictest sense, you have to be at liberty to even study the spiritual. The concept of the old, very hierarchical orders of organized religion is something the occult tends to oppose. Symbolism used in the realm of propaganda on a spiritual level has begun to mesh, I think, with politics and society in general. You see the return of neo-paganism. in the wake of sort of the 1980s and 1990s has now been directly influenced by the internet as well. The meshing together is partially literary. Of course, as I stated before, in the first segments, the availability of the spiritual goes hand in hand with the availability, especially of books, because when you're talking about spiritual lore up until basically the 90s, it's all in print. A lot of those are rare, privately printed, very ancient, and so they've been released to the general public. We are seeing a renaissance within the occult that's very much like the occult renaissance we had maybe in the early 1900s as radio and early wave electrical sort of things spread around. There's more printing going on. Psychology, science, politics, all of these things at that time were meshed with the spiritual too. Now we've seen the good and bad side of this. For every bit of Atlantean lore where some group of people decides, well, we're going to be very positive, we're going to grow things, eat organic, we're going to be green hedge witches or something. For every group that's like that, you also have a group that might be tinged by actual extremism, actual violence. They may say, well, they may become a doomsday cult. They may become spiritual fanatics under the banner of some political system. I think that's something we have to look out for. But generally speaking, those that are making the memes are not, you've been told probably, well, it's Russia. It's state actors or their cohorts doing this. That's not my experience. My experience, at least in my opinion, based on what I've seen, it's primarily grassroots. And it's primarily meant for benevolent, I think, purposes.
Yeah, but I guess I would hope that in the future, the focus of human society turns away from wealth or material accumulation more towards inner development, occult development, which is what somebody like Rudolf Steiner talked about and explored in anthroposophy. I mean, I think we have a lot of latent capacities, psychic abilities, energy forces like chi and kundalini that, we could have like schools, training grounds where these become a part of our basic, human rights in a way to explore our inner resources beyond what we now even imagine is possible. My own experience has suggested a lot more is possible than we now know, or now we now accept. And yeah, beyond that, there is, negative, I believe negative occult forces, operating through, masonry, skull and bones, all that kind of stuff. I think that's one level, but I don't really see it as conspiratorial so much. I feel it's like it's like a co-creation, like the human psyche kind of co-creates with these like astral or natural realms in some sense. But we have to become more, consciously aware of our co-creations, our projections.
I want to also ask if there is any thoughts on Moloch, who in the internet is considered to be the arch enemy of Ket, depicted as a bull that the frog god fights with. There are these theories about how the elite worship Moloch and he's this entity that they give children to and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just curious, Daniel, in your experiences, have you encountered, especially after the synthetic DMT trip that you had, these kind of entities?
Hold on a second. Hey, Ian, I'll get you a drink and we wait like 10 minutes.
What's that? What was your experience after the synthetic DMT trip when it comes to all these demonic forces? And do you see something like Moloch, which was a Canaanite entity back in the day, still being talked about today as being particularly relevant in such a way as the darkness that we have to overcome when we go into the light?
That sort of takes us like off topic. I think I'm gonna pass on that one for now. We're talking about the person.
No problem. Thank you.
I would just quickly add, there is a bull just downtown on Wall Street, and they did recently give the bull a child statue. So take that however you want.
All right. Next question from the gentleman over here.
Yeah, thank you. My question is for Bill specifically and for Minds. First of all, I'm a fan of your work and I really like the Minds platform. I'm a user. And I feel like creating a network for the people, by the people is hard. And I see that you guys are trying to do that by having features like, for example, I can not only boost a post that I made, first of all, using credits that I've gained from sharing my content, so I'm getting paid for that, which is great. But I can boost the post also that you made if I believe in the cause, the organization, or an idea that you put out there, right? Which kind of suggests that, Minds as a platform is believing in humanity and consciousness at the same time, and trusting that probability is that out of 2 million users that Minds has, majority of them would support the right causes, the right ideas, and believe the right news, and support that. I just wanted to know if there's any way you are, as a platform, are monitoring the morality and the accuracy of content that's being mostly boosted or sponsored or seen by the users.
I think providing more tools for the community to make decisions on what's true. And I think the metrics on the post do show a degree of what people think, but I actually do agree with the ability for the community to kind of help label content and provide primary sources, provide peer review, try to understand what is true and what's not. But I mean, honestly, right now we have pretty limited resources for going through and verifying content, and even Tim's been going into this with some of his videos, like with what is true and what like there is truth. I think we think that. So, but also getting into content is a little bit of a luxury that we haven't really had the ability to do yet. So, I mean, I think definitely in the future, helping people become educated more to understand what's true, and maybe some sort of metrics around the post to help disclose what the community thinks. What do you think?
Yeah, I think those metrics should be there. Especially, I know it's difficult to judge morality because it's personal. You can judge accuracy for sure. You can make sure that content that's not accurate is not being pushed out, like fake news, etc. But morality is everyone has their own morals, and you cannot be like, okay, this content cannot be here because I feel it's immoral. That's a good one person.
Yeah,
but you can definitely take a collective vote on that for sure. If there's a way to do that.
But even accuracy for fake news is very difficult.
Yeah, but it can be cross-checked, so it can be out there.
The knife media, I've been talking about them recently because they've done some really good work where they actually they say that they're putting the scientific method into tracking news stories for bias and slant. But I mean, even when you have very large news organizations that you want to trust, they get things wrong too. So there's been a string of really bad reporting from like ABC, CNN, and now the AP. If the biggest news outlets are get big stories wrong, we'll never know for sure.
All right, I think we should wrap it.
There is one last gentleman there with a question, and that's it. No more questions after that gentleman. Let's do it.
There's a guy who's running for Congress, Paul Newland, who is campaigning on proposing anti-censorship legislation. I just wanted to know what you thought of that.
Sure, hang on. I don't know.
Where do we
exactly what
donate?
he's talking about.
His name is Paul Newland. He's running for Congress in Wisconsin. He's proposing anti-censorship legislation, so I just wanted to know what you thought of that.
I would wanna know what that
specifically
entails.
what it says.
Yeah, like what,
I guess just using the government to enforce the First Amendment. And all other questions.
So just to kind of add to this a little bit, we're all moaning about YouTube, Facebook, Google. I mean, these are centralized platforms that exist, and we don't have to use them. So you can watch a video, you can send me a video. You don't have to use YouTube to do that, but we do need the internet to be able to share that. And the internet, since really its inception, has been a platform that is totally free. You can do whatever you want, and that's mainly by net neutrality and other things like that. Net neutrality is being pretty much broken apart in the last few months. So net neutrality really was protecting what you were asking for. So you don't need a censorship law because you can make a website like Minds. Disclaimer, I do work for Minds. But yeah, people can do that, and you can make a website. But now with net neutrality being, patched away, you're gonna not be able to make these websites.
Be very careful what passes for net neutrality, especially Title II changes that want to consider or treat the internet as a utility, which can be therefore subject to licensing. So it's a great concept. But remember, whenever the government gives you a great sounding thing, no child left behind, Affordable Care Act, military, whatever.
But it's the idea behind, you know, not looking at the packets, not seeing where it's going to. It's basically like sending a letter in the post. The mail is not reading that. They're not looking at, you know, what's in your package that they're sending to someone because they don't like what's in it. And that's really what legislation should be about, to protect it. And similar platforms such as, you know, if you have an iPhone, there's no way you can get any apps on your phone without being approved by Apple. So really, that's a big problem. Android's fine, you can get apps from elsewhere.
You can jailbreak your phone.
Sorry?
You can jailbreak an iPhone.
You can, but most people don't know how to do that. So it should be easy for people to do that. So
what about the Internet Bill of Rights? Do we talk about that or no? We can end on that because that seems to be a pretty good idea. I know. What do you think, Six?
Sorry there, my thing wasn't appearing for a moment. I support the concept of an Internet Bill of Rights. It should simply be this. Because sites work with government entities, whether they're domestic or foreign, they should be explicitly constrained by the First and Fourth Amendments. It's really that simple. Again, it's more about pragmatism than it is actual legalese. Like, I understand the fact that there's no constitutional prohibition on a company kicking someone off their platform for breaking some obscure TOS. They can make that whatever they want, but do we want a society like that? I would say, as far as Nealon goes, I haven't looked at the specific legislation. If it does just that and says, well, you know, websites can't censor, you know, merely harmful material, it has to be specifically criminal under U.S. law. Yes, it's something I would basically support, but I'll say it this way.
Hold on, Six, I gotta stop you. I'm sorry, isn't Nealon like a really racist, like, anti-Semite guy on Twitter?
Nealon definitely has out there beliefs, but insofar as he's just proposing that, it doesn't matter who's proposing it. If it is fundamentally a good idea, we've got to get past the point at which we give into the one-dimensionality, which I previously spoke of. We can't just say, well, that person's a kook or that person's racist in some way, and so any idea they happen to make has to be part of that one-dimensional caricature. A person can have a very skilled person might be totally flawed in their personal life. A person who's basically a saint might be totally inept. We have to get past that. But yes, I would generally support the basic idea, but maybe it should be limited by market cap. For instance, like a site that has become quasi-monopolistic, instead of trying to break it apart, which the government never has the balls to do anyway, they're never going to apply anti-monopoly laws to any meaningful degree online. Just make it so that a site that is above a certain cap is a de facto public utility without giving any of the legal precedent to the government to license anything. But I would point something else out with net neutrality. People who are really on board with preserving it don't seem to understand a domain registrar can abuse things the same way as an ISP. Why is it that the ISP should be restrained from throttling a site and the domain registrar shouldn't? You need that, or indexing sites, like Google's own search methodology. It is basically a monopoly. All the other search engines just use Google anyway and apply extra layers to it.
I just want to say too.
Wait, let Mark just quit. You good?
Well, because to a degree, I mean, you don't need to use DNS. DNS is you know, the domain name services are basically services put in there for people to route things through. So I mean, you can make another one. You can set up your own that people point theirs to. You're just using a community there of DNS providers. You can use someone else, but with the internet, unless you're gonna put your own cables to every single person in the world, that's really kind of out of the question. So you know, the DNS isn't that. I mean, it should be protected as well. And so should the domain registrars and things like that. And to a degree, they were until they were, you know, given away a few years ago. Yeah, I think I kind of.
I think my personal challenge with it is you have to regulate basically every step of the way into a platform, right? So you're talking about DNS, the registrars. Basically, any company that supports you in any way has to be regulated because, you know, what we saw with what happened with Gab or like the Daily Stormer. Different companies through the pipeline have terms and conditions. So with, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Gab, but the domain registrar said, oh, you're violating hate speech by the social platform because of what users are saying, so they kick you off. An internet bill of rights wouldn't just be for specifically one company or the platform. It'd have to regulate everything. And I think the challenge with that is if you try to place something, when you try to put a system in place that affects numerous systems, you're going to create a whole lot of bugs.
I think that's it.
It's big. We'll continue.
Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. Thanks, Sticks. Is that about all?
Peace out.